Hey, what's going on, gang? This is Nate on the Stone, and welcome to the 17th episode of The Rolling Stone. And this is where I give my initial thoughts and opinions about stories that are currently in the news. And the first story today is about Mario Lopez. It would have to be about Mario Lopez. So, in case this whole mishiva, flew under your radar, and count your lucky stars if it did, back in June, Mario Lopez was a guest on Candace Owens' podcast, the Candace Owens Show. And during the podcast, Owens was talking about kind of this growing trend of craziness in Hollywood, particularly when it comes to woke parents. She brought up the example of the actress Charlize Theron, who is a terrific actress, but she's kind of how should I put it, a couple of peeps short of an Easter basket, because she adopted a boy and a girl, and then when the boy was 3 years old, the boy said, "Hey, I'm a girl too," and Charlize Theron said, "Okay, yeah, you're a she, you're not a he anymore, so I'm raising two girls now instead of a boy and a girl." And so Candace Owens was talking about that, and then in response to that, Mario Lopez said this. This was quoted in Yahoo News. Mario Lopez said this, quote, "Look, I'm never one to tell anyone how to parent their kids, obviously, and I think if you come from a place of love, you really can't go wrong. But at the same time, my God, if you're 3 years old and you're saying you're feeling a certain way, or you think you're a boy or a girl, or whatever the case may be, I just think it's dangerous as a parent to make this determination. Then, well, okay, then you're going to a boy or a girl, whatever the case may be. It's sort of alarming, and my gosh, I just think about the repercussions later on," unquote. Okay, so he said that. That was back in June, okay? But those comments didn't really start making traction. They weren't really put out there in social media until this past week on Wednesday, and then all hell broke loose, as was completely predictable. So the Human Rights Commission on Twitter said Mario Lopez's comments are dangerous to the safety and well-being of LGBTQ youth, especially trans kids who deserve to be loved and accepted for who they are, unquote. Trans activist Alexandra Halaby said this, quote, "It's unfortunate that someone who is so involved with GLAAD like Mario Lopez would be so misinformed about trans kids," unquote. And there were tons of people on Twitter saying that, they were canceling Mario Lopez. They weren't going to have anything to do with him anymore. Basically, in essence, they were excommunicating him from their group, right? They were excommunicating him from their lives and from really anything that had to do with their lives and their well-being. They were shoving him out into the outer darkness because of that. Now, of course, the Yahoo News story, which is kind of the route where this story was first published, and then of course it spread to all the other news outlets. The Yahoo News story quoted Dr. Christina Brown. She is a social psychologist at the University of Kentucky. And Dr. Brown said that, of course, the comments that Owens and Lopez were making on Owens' podcast were just completely unacceptable, because kids, not just trans kids, but kids need to be protected from rhetoric like that, and that kids need to feel empowered. You know what? Parents shouldn't be judging their kids. Parents should be making their kids feel empowered. Okay? That was another take on this whole mishiva. Now, first and foremost, going off from that, from what Dr. Brown said there, okay? It is not your job as a parent to empower your kid, okay? If you are a parent, if you are going to be a parent, if you are just someone like me who hopes one day to find somebody and to start a family after getting married, your job is not to empower your child. That is not your role as a parent. Your job as a parent is to raise your child, okay? You need to raise them. You need to teach them right from wrong. You need to teach them virtues. You need to teach them principles. You need to teach them manners. You basically need to channel childhood. You need to channel your children, because otherwise they're like wildfires. They go out in every sort of direction, in every which way. And of course, you can't do that because people can't do that. You might be able to, if you're just a wild man living off in the mountains somewhere, but last I looked, and it's still true, we're living in civilization. And so you can't do that. Your job as a parent is to raise your kid, to teach them right from wrong, to raise them so that they know what they should do in order to be good people. Your job is not to empower them. Now, having said that, part of raising them is about installing in them, a good sense of self-confidence. But you don't do that by just giving the thumbs up to every feeling that they have or everything that they say. You do that by teaching them skills. You do that by helping them to think through problems so that they become self-reliant and independent, so that they can stand on their own 2 feet, okay? Empowerment? No. No one needs to feel empowered. That will come from knowing right from wrong and from knowing that you can take care of yourself. It will come from the confidence. Now, what is also interesting is that these same people who are canceling Mario Lopez, right, who are shoving him off into the outer darkness, this is the same group of people who have absolutely no problem with killing a baby, even in the later stages of development before he's born. Remember the New York law that broadened abortion in New York. Remember the Illinois law that even took it a step further. The Illinois law that said that basically you can get an abortion right up to the moment of birth, and which even really got around the federal ban on partial birth abortion. Right? Remember those? These are the same people who are saying that Mario Lopez is endangering trans 3-year-olds because of his rhetoric. It sounds like to me what the left is saying is that children and their worth, it doesn't come from them simply existing and simply being people, because of course if they believe that, that would mean that they would believe that you can't kill them, especially when it comes to the later stages of the pregnancy, after 22 weeks, when you can look at a sonogram and see a baby. Okay, even if we were going to take the ridiculous argument that, well, a fetus isn't a human being, okay? These are the same people. These are also the same people who belong to the group where after-birth abortion is being, parlayed around. And after-birth abortion, the idea that parents have the right to kill their child after birth, okay? After the baby has been born and after the baby, is living with the parents, if the parents think, parenthood really isn't what we thought it was going to be, you know what? We're going to try again a little later. These people think that these parents can take their baby to a clinic and basically put the baby down after birth abortion. Okay? The Journal of Medical Ethics back in 2012 published a whole piece defending this idea. People such as Peter Singer have also defended this idea. And you can see this idea slowly but surely gain more acceptance in these baby steps, like in the New York and the Illinois law, which now says that you can get an abortion up to the moment of birth. There's that. And the third thing is that this story ties in so well with something that happened this past week as well. The first night of the second Democratic presidential primary debate, where basically the radicals in the group, okay, the Elizabeth Warrens, the Bernie Sanders, they made it absolutely clear that the Democrat Party and the left in general has no room if you're a moderate or a centrist. If you're a moderate or you're a centrist, you really have no place in the postmodern Democrat Party or the postmodern progressive movement, the postmodern left. Okay? You are unwelcome there. And this is shown beautifully here in this Mario Lopez story. You know what? Until this podcast came out, Mario Lopez was smelling like a rose as far as the woke and the social justice warrior types were concerned. I mean, back in 2015, Mario Lopez was the Grand Marshal at Miami's annual Pride Parade. So he's been seen as, an ally of the LGBTQ community. But because he puts one toe out of line and says, maybe a 3-year-old can't quite decide for himself whether, he's a boy or a girl, and the parents should actually just tell him, you're a boy if you're a boy and you're a girl if you're a girl. Because he actually said that one thing, put one toe out of line, excommunication, and he is now, person non grata. So bad that several hours after this story broke, he actually went and, did the same, mea culpas, and I apologize, and my remarks were very inappropriate, ill thought out, insensitive, please forgive me. Now, whether this actually saves him or not, that is going to have to be seen as we go into the future. But that is story number 1. Our second story takes us to Baltimore. And remember a couple of weeks ago when President Trump got into hot water because he suggested that the 4 members of the squad, Ilhan Omar, AOC, etc., should maybe go back where they came from? Remember all that? Well, he got into more hot water on Twitter again. This time, his tweets were directed against Congressman Elijah Cummings. Cummings has been a vocal critic of Trump, and he's been, aggressively attacking Trump's border policies and the conditions at the border, etc. So, on July 27th, Trump, in a series of tweets again, said this, quote, "Representative Elijah Cummings has been a brutal bully, shouting and screaming at the great men and women of Border Patrol about conditions at the southern border, when actually his Baltimore district is far worse and more dangerous. His district is considered the worst in the USA. As proven last week during a congressional tour, the border is clean, efficient, and well run, just very crowded. Cummings' district is a disgusting rat and rodent-infested mess. If he spent more time in Baltimore, maybe he could help clean up this very dangerous and filthy place. Why is so much money sent to Elijah Cummings' district when it is considered the worst run and most dangerous anywhere in the United States? No human being would want to live there. Where is all this money going? How much is stolen? Investigate this corrupt mess immediately," unquote. I don't have to tell you what happened. You probably, gang, already can imagine the reaction that these tweets got. And you would be 110% correct. So, for example, Governor Larry Hogan, the governor of Maryland, said, "The comments are outrageous and inappropriate. Enough is enough. People are fed up with this kind of nonsense. Why are we not focused on solving the problems and getting to work? Quite frankly, what is the president doing? What is Congress doing?" unquote. Al Sharpton, who had already been scheduled to be in Baltimore, held an impromptu press conference about Trump's tweets, where he said that Trump has a particular venom for black people. And that was the angle that was actually taken by a CNN news anchor, Victor Blackwell. Blackwell was born and raised in Baltimore, and his claim to fame, the reason why he popped up on the radar, is because he actually broke down in near tears when he was reporting on this story. And what he took offense at was, the president's use of the word infested and infestation. Say, well, he only uses that word when he's talking about districts that are predominantly black or brown or minority. FYI, 2/3 of Baltimore's population is African American. And Blackwell also said, he continued this by saying, when Trump says that no human being would want to live in Baltimore, he is basically dehumanizing all the people who live there or who have to live there. So, no human being would want to live here. Baltimore is predominantly populated with black Americans, i.e. black Americans are not human beings. Trump is a racist, that old refrain. But here's the problem. Baltimore is a mess. And until about 2 seconds ago, everyone agreed with that estimation. So let's just take some of these things, okay? Let's just take a few of these things. The rat problem. You know what? Baltimore is infested with rats. It is so bad that last year in 2018, PBS actually ran a special called Rat Problem about the rodents in Baltimore. It's so bad that Animal Planet listed Baltimore as the third worst rodent-infested city, not in Maryland, not in the United States, not in North America, not in the Western Hemisphere, but in the entire world. Think about that. How bad does a rodent population, a rodent infestation have to be that you are the third worst you are the third worst town for rodents in the entire world? Okay? You're going up against huge populations. You're going up against Hong Kong and Shanghai. You're going up against Tokyo and LA and San Francisco and Paris and London and Frankfurt and Cairo, and Sydney and all of these places. Rio de Janeiro. No. Baltimore is the third worst, according to Animal Planet. And as Paul Joseph Watson asked, does that mean that Animal Planet is now racist? That's a really good question. Okay, but let's look at crime. Okay, 2017, there were 342 murders in Baltimore per 100,000 people. There were 382 rapes per 100,000 people, 5,879 robberies, and 5,827 assaults per 100,000 people just in 2017, okay? In 2018, the Baltimore Sun reported that the murder rate in Baltimore was the highest in the U.S. It beat out New York, it beat out Chicago, it beat out LA, it beat out Atlanta, it beat out San Francisco. Baltimore was the worst city in the United States for murder, okay? Let's take another example. Let's take education, okay? Education is a joke in Hollywood, okay? Excuse me, not in Hollywood, though I'm sure I'm sure there's a joke in Hollywood too. Come to think of it, we just had Charlize Theron, and her, social experiments. But education in Baltimore is a joke. So, back in 2017 again, The Hill ran a report, and I'm going to quote here from that report. Quote, according to information uncovered by the Project Baltimore investigation by the local Fox News affiliate, WBFF, Baltimore spends roughly $1.4 billion annually on education, or roughly $16,000 per student. Baltimore's spending on education is the fourth highest of any municipality in the country. Despite this massive commitment of resources, Baltimore schools have some of the lowest educational proficiency levels in the country. According to Project Baltimore investigative journalist Chris Pabst, reading proficiency rates among Baltimore high school graduates hover at around 11%, and math proficiency rates hover around 12%. This is in a school system that graduates roughly 70% of its students each year. There is clearly a major disconnection between the high graduation rate and the extremely dismal and academic proficiency rate, unquote. On top of that, several school districts in Baltimore have reported zero, repeat that, zero, count it again, zero proficiency in reading, writing, and in math. Zero proficiency. Their students are fundamentally illiterate. Okay? Fundamentally illiterate in 2019. In 2019, in the 21st century, there are children, American children, going to school in the education system of the lone superpower of the world who are functionally illiterate. I just want that to sink into your heads, gang, because it is infuriating, it is shameful, and it is beyond a joke. It is beyond tragic. It is appalling that this is happening today in our United States of America. And this didn't just magically all of a sudden happen because of Trump. This problem has been festering for years. And the funny thing is that everyone admitted that this was a problem. Everyone has admitted that Baltimore has a rat problem. Everyone admitted that Baltimore has a crime problem. Everyone admitted that Baltimore has an education problem. When Trump points to the problem, all of a sudden, the problem isn't here in Baltimore, it's with Trump. There was actually an opinion piece that was published in the Orlando Sentinel, and the title of this opinion piece was "Better to have a few rats than to be one." The rat, of course, referring to Trump. And the piece actually made the case, it came from the racist POV again, that Trump only tweeted what he did against Elijah Cummings and against Baltimore so that he could tickle the cockles of the hearts of the white supremacists who love him. You know, it is not white supremacy to point out a problem. You know what would be white supremacy? What would be white supremacy is acknowledging this problem and then saying, you know what? They deserve it. Let Baltimore rot. Let it, catch on fire again like, the British wanted to do in 1812. Let it sink into the sea. Let all that stuff happen. Who cares about what happens to Baltimore? But instead of doing that, Trump has actually pointed out the problem and has said, let's fix the problem. So apparently, again, it is racist to point out the problem so that people are made aware, again, of the problem. Remember, the president has a bully pulpit. He can kind of point and choose to which problems and what issues he wants attention to be focused on. Doing that to actually alleviate this pain and suffering in the black community in Baltimore, that's what's racist. That's what's racist. Just, allowing the problem to happen or to say, oh gosh, we don't really have a problem. Trump's just making stuff up. That, apparently, is the non-racist, that's the non-racist line and path that you have to take now. Well, as for me and myself, I would rather be considered and called a racist and actually do whatever little I can to help people instead of just closing my eyes and going through life ignoring the pain and suffering of my fellow Americans. But that is story number 2. And our third story for this episode has to do with Ronald Reagan, and I'm just going to keep it 100 with you, gang. I really don't take any relish in this story because Ronald Reagan, he's one of my heroes. He's one of my favorite presidents. He's in my top 7. And he is definitely one of the best presidents of the 20th century. Really admire him. But I have not seen a lot of people on the right talking about this story. I haven't seen anything on the Daily Wire or the Daily Signal or the Blaze or the Federalist. If people on any of these sites have written about this story, I apologize in advance that your story or these stories slipped under my radar. But because personally, from where I'm sitting right now, I haven't seen any stories about this, I wanted to address this story and give it my thoughts because Dr. Tim Naftali, he is a clinical associate professor of history at New York University. He has uncovered part of a telephone conversation that Ronald Reagan had with Richard Nixon, in 1971, when Reagan was governor of California and when Nixon was in the White House. And in this recorded phone conversation, Reagan actually calls these delegates from Tanzania, Africa, at the UN. These UN delegates from Tanzania, Africa, monkeys. Reagan said to Nixon, quote, "To see those monkeys from those African countries, damn them, they're still uncomfortable wearing shoes," unquote. That's really, really bad. But now I have to give some context to this. What Reagan was talking about and what Reagan was upset with these Tanzanian delegates and with a lot of delegates from the African nations that were part of the UN in 1971 is because the U.S. at this time had been petitioning the UN to allow Taiwan to join the UN, Taiwan is a very weird country. If you remember, Taiwan is that little island that is off the coast of China. And the government of Taiwan claims that it is in fact the legitimate government of China. Okay? In 1949, after World War II, remember, Mao Zedong, the leader of the Chinese communists, he actually defeated the Chinese nationalists under General Chiang Kai-shek. And the Chinese nationalists, they retreated. They left China and settled in Taiwan, right? The communists took over. The communists have ruled China ever since 1949. Meanwhile, the Chinese nationalists and their descendants have stayed on Taiwan, and they have continued to make the case, even today, that they are the legitimate government of China, that the communists are interlopers, they are usurpers, they are not legitimate. So, 1971, right? Really one of the low points. We're getting into one of the really low points of the Cold War for the U.S. The U.S. has been trying to get the UN to bring Taiwan into this quote-unquote Brotherhood of Nations. The UN doesn't do that, okay? Instead, they allow the communist Chinese, they allow communist China to come into the UN. And Reagan, correctly or not, thought that that decision was helped, that the final push to make that decision final came from the African delegates, the delegates from the African nations there at the UN at the time. And that's why he called Nixon in frustration and said, damn monkeys, they're still uncomfortable wearing shoes. He was very, very angry that an ally of the United States had been pretty much given kind of the fly by the UN, and a communist nation had been allowed to join the UN. Now, before I go on, I'm going to say that that quote still not his finest moment. Not his finest moment at all. You can be legitimately angry, but even when you're angry, you shouldn't, go into stereotypes and, I'm just going to say it, racist things like that. It is racist to call someone a monkey. It's a racist. It's a horrible thing to say to anyone. And it's especially bad to say that, to, again, a black person. That word, and that insult does have a lot of connotation to it. So, a bad thing to say. Absolutely, and I'm not going to defend it. But this is what I'm going to say, okay? And this is a contrast that I'm going to make. And this actually ties in, brings us full circle to the Mario Lopez story that I started this video on. The left will love you as long as you're with them 100%. If you're not with them 100%, they will cast you out like a leper. You can even be with them 99.3, 99.6%. It's not enough. That, fraction of a percentage point is all that it needs for them to completely disown you. Okay? You are either with them or you are their enemy. But, people like us who try to understand human nature, I'm saying that about, most of the people here on the right. We try to understand human nature. We understand that people aren't perfect. That's one of the reasons why we are so opposed to this idea of utopia, because we know that it's never going to work. Because in order to create a perfect society, people would have to be perfect. But since people aren't going to be perfect and can't be made perfect, except from up there, that's a doomed project, and it's just going to bring more misery and suffering to everyone. Because we understand that people aren't perfect, they are, a mixture of light and dark. Most people, they have virtues and they have vices. They have good points and they have bad points. Because we understand that, we don't have to, put people into blocks. We can, look at someone over there. We could look at, hypothetically speaking, we could look at someone like Bernie Sanders and say, you know what? Oh, he said something that I agreed with. He said something right. Or heck, you know what? He made a good point. I still don't agree with him on his philosophy, but he made a good point. And it's the same thing here. We can look at this quote from Ronald Reagan and we can condemn what he said here in this particular instance. But we do not have to completely cancel him out. We do not have to erase him from history. We do not have to erase him or his legacy from our hearts, from our history, from, our memories even. Because we understand that being a human being, he was imperfect, which means that he has vices, like here, and that he had virtues and good points too. Virtues and principles and goodness in him as well, which manifested itself multiple times throughout his life and throughout his presidency. And so that we can continue to honor him, and we can continue to look up to him, admire him, and emulate him for those good points, while also understanding that he wasn't a demigod, and that he wasn't perfect, and that, like all of us, he had vices, flaws, and foibles as well. So that's what I wanted to say about that. And as usual, I have talked for too long. So happy Friday, gang. Have a great weekend, and I will talk to you all on Tuesday. Ciao.